Alright, well, I don't normally do work on Chevys on this channel because I don't really own any, and I've never done any work on a diesel because I've only owned mine for a year and it's under warranty. But what we have today is an 07 Chevy 2500 four-wheel drive with the 6.6 Duramax in it, and it's got a tune on it and it runs all right. We just put new batteries in it yesterday so I could troubleshoot this thing, but its main issue is the temperature's not coming up. It won't get above about 110 degrees no matter what you drive it. So I figured the thermostat's a shot. She's got about a little over 201,000 miles on it. I don't think they've ever been done. So that's what we're going to do today. The first thing I found you got to do, you got to get this hat out of here. And that's really held on with one bolt here, which goes on top of the thermostat housing down there, and one clamp here. So after you get that off, there's two thermostats in this idiotic thing. You can see 1 and 2. And that pipe is hard piped over to here. And there are two bolts that are holding it down. One right here and one on the other side of that. And I'm looking at it, I think the way to get to that other bolt is you have to disconnect the plugs here and here, and then you can get to the other bolt on the other side that matches this one here. And after that, you'll be able to swing that whole thing up out of the way, get at the thermostats, and then bolt it back together. So that's my next step. Alright, so once you get all this garbage unplugged and you move this stuff out of the way, you can actually get to the bolts that hold this bracket down, and then you can get it up out of the way enough to actually get in there and get to that bolt that's kind of blocked by the wire. But there's two 12mm bolts up top and a 12mm stud under the charge tube that has a nut on it, and they're all accessible pretty well. Surprisingly, this isn't anywhere near as terrible as my Fords are, but so now I should be able to take the two bolts holding this off, and we should be pretty close to popping that thermostat. Alright, so we got the bolts loose, and that pipe is loose. Comes down to in here, and we got 1, 2, 3, 4, looks like 5 12mm. That'll come off. I've got two things that concern me a little bit about access. I got a connector here which I can unplug, but I've got a little bypass hose in here it's rubber, but I'm not sure what kind of room it's going to leave me. I think it's going to be okay, but we're going to see. I'm hoping I don't have to end up popping the AC compressor off, but we will see. And so now we're going to try to, since I didn't see a radiator drain on this silly thing, for whatever reason, I'm going to try to take some of those screws off and see how big of a mess I can make. Okay, so the 4 bolts on the bottom are actually the hold down bolts. The 5th one in the top is a much smaller screw, and it's a bleed, so that's where the drain started. And then when we put it back together, we're going to have to leave that open until we get fluid up to it, and then that will allow us to make sure we don't have an air bubble in there. But so that's a bleed, which is interesting. But it has drained a little bit, so now I'm going to attempt to pop that cover. And they're out. The way to make the clearance for this to work is you got to pop the bolt out here that holds the fan shroud, and then there's one more bolt here that holds the oil fill tube to the block. And I didn't have to pop the oil fill tube clip all the way down at the bottom, but that gave me just enough movement to lift that thing high enough to be able to pop those things out. I'll tell you, the antifreeze in this truck looks really good. I got another gallon of Dex Cool to refill it, but I don't see anything wrong. Made sure the gaskets came out with it, because there really is no gasket other than what is on the thermostats themselves. Now that's all that the gasket is. There's your front one and your rear one. But so now we're going to start putting it back together and hope this thing works. And there she is, following the picture that came with it. Put the smaller one with the vents in the rear, with the vents facing the rear, and the bigger one up front. And now we're going to start putting everything back together, starting with everything on here except the screw, then the 2 fasteners I took out of the oil tube, and then we're going to start getting all of the wiring hooked back up, get that set in place, and get this thing started so we can fill it and bleed it and see what we're going to do. So she's all back together, basically. Hopefully everything's going to work. Poured in my new Dexcool until it started running out of that little bleeder down there, and plugged that back up. And now we're about to fire this pig up and see if she will heat up a little bit this time. Alright, so I've been driving it for about 30 minutes. Temperature has come up to 185. I watched the thermostats open. It's been fluctuating between 180 and 190, pretty solid, which is more than I can say about what it did yesterday because it wouldn't get over 110. So come over here to the front, check our fluid level, which looks to be a little bit down. I'll put the rest of the gallon in it. I don't see any leaks. No runs, no drips, no errors. I think we got her. So that is how you change the thermostats on a 2007 6.6 liter Duramax.